have no regard or respect for rest, and I think they all should be exterminated. What is American Gangster about? Them American rest? Raymond and Alto and Nicky Bars and Terry Ford, man, them rest.
Raymond Bumpy Johnson was a prominent African-American gangster who played a prominent role in Harlem, criminal underworld during the mid-20th century. Born in Charleston, South Carolina on October the 31st, 1905, to Margaret and William Johnson. He earned his nickname due to a bump on his head. At the age of 10, his family sent him north to escape racial tension after his older brother was accused of killing a white man. Bumpy's temper and defiance toward white authority figures concerned his parents, leading them to send him to Harlem in 1919 to live with his sister. You see, in Harlem, Johnson became a high-ranking figure in the underworld, starting his career with Gangster. William Bud Hewlett was a known and feared gangster in Harlem, providing muscle for Dutch Schultz. Bud took a liking to Bumpy and gave him a job as a bodyguard after Bumpy stepped to him and refused to leave his storefront. Before aligning with the infamous number queen, Madam Stephanie St. Clair, Bumpy Johnson quickly rose through the ranks, becoming her enforcer during a bloody turf war against the Jewish mob boss Dutch over control of the lucrative numbers racket in Harlem. Jewish and Italian-American crime families saw a decrease in profits and decided to move in on the Harlem gambling scene. Bronx-based mob boss Dutch Schultz was the first to move in, beating and killing number operators. St. Clair and her chief enforcer, Bumpy Johnson, refused to pay protection to Schultz. Despite the violence and intimidation by police they faced, St. Clair responded by attacking the storefronts of businesses that ran Dutch Schultz's betting operations and tipping off the police about him. This resulted in the police raiding his house, arresting more than a dozen of his employees and seizing approximately $12 million, which would be $196 million in today's currency. St. Clair never submitted to Dutch, unlike many others in Harlem. After St. Clair's struggles with Dutch, she had to become legitimate and stay away from the police. So she passed on her criminal business to Bumpy Johnson. Eventually, her former enforcer negotiated with Lucky Lucino, and Lucky took over Dutch's spot, with a percentage going to Bumpy. The Mafianos then had to go to Bumpy first if they had any problems in Harlem. Luciano realized that the war in Harlem was bad for business. Dutch was fatally wounded in a shooting ordered by the Commission in 1935. St. Clair, though uninvolved in the hit, sent an infamous telegram to Dutch on his deathbed that read, "As you sow, so shall you reap." The telegram reportedly made headlines across the nation. By the 1940s, Johnson had become the reigning king in Harlem, and St. Clair became less and less involved in the number game. This is when Bumpy Johnson got the name Godfather of Harlem. After Dutch's murder in 1935, Johnson brokered a deal with the Italian mafia, allowing him to maintain significant power in Harlem's racket while aligning with outside criminal syndicates. One of Bumpy Johnson's top oppositions was gangster Red Diller Morrison. Red was a Harlem mob boss and enforcer, once called the most dangerous man in the country by federal law enforcement agents. Morrison's underworld resume included running a multi-million-dollar heroin ring in which he was connected to Lucky Luciano. That was his connect. Enforcing, pimping, and extortion. Johnson's criminal career included multiple arrests, but he managed to evade serious prison time until 1952, when he was convicted of a drug conspiracy involving heroin. He served most of his 15-year sentence at Alcatraz, where he was known as inmate number 1117. Upon his release in 1963, he returned to Harlem, where he influence persisted. Despite his criminal activities, Johnson was respected in Harlem community and was seen as a protector of the neighborhood. He married in 1948, and he also had two daughters, Ruth and Elisa, the latter from a different relationship. Despite his illegal ventures, Bumpy Johnson became a figure of public interest, even being featured in Jet magazine. In 1952, Johnson's activities were reported in the Celebrity People section of Jet magazine. That same year, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for a drug conspiracy conviction related to heroin. 2 years later, Jet reported in its crime section that Johnson began his sentence after losing an appeal. He served the majority of that sentence at Alcatraz prison in San Francisco Bay, California, as inmate number 117, and was released in 1963 on parole. Now, you may be wondering why some things I did not mention. Number one, in reference to the daughter of Bumpy Johnson being raped. That is not true. Number two, Frank Lucas being Bumpy Johnson's right-hand man. That is not true. As well as Bumpy Johnson being known to kill a mob boss. That is not true. I sincerely doubt it. Bumpy was extremely connected to the Gangster family, led by the Lucinos, then the Costellos, then the Ganvincis, and eventually, much later, the Gangantes. Bumpy's connection to these families, along with his own influence in Harlem, saw him become a very protected and powerful drug dealer. It makes no sense for him to kill a made man from the family that protects him. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. Johnson was under a federal indictment for drug conspiracy when he died of a heart attack on July the 7th, 1968, at the age of 62. He was at Wells Restaurant in Harlem shortly before 2 a.m., and the waitress had just served him coffee and a chicken leg and some grits when he fell over, clutching his chest. He is buried in Woodland Cemetery in the Bronx, New York City. So let me give you some facts here, and then I'm going to show you the events that as it happened. Gangantes didn't become boss until 1981 and ruled until 2005, but often through front bosses. Some immediately that rules Gangante out. The boss or bosses in Bumpy's day were Lucino, 1931 through 1946, and then Costello, 1946 through 1958, and then the Ganvincis, 1959 through 1969. Fun fact, it was Gangito who shot Costello on orders from Ganvinci when he wanted to become boss. Costello survived, but refused to testify against either man, and refused to name his shooters in court, to which Gangante said, "Gee, thanks, Frank." Bumpy Johnson, the Godfather of Harlem, died. His net worth was $50 million in the 1960s, totaling $521 million in 2024. Yeah, he was a multimillionaire, and he never was a rat.